everyone to see this after. But morning, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for another Connect and Share on a Friday. I can't believe it's Friday again. 110 episodes we're up to, and yeah, that beautiful image we're just talking about is of Lura Village this week, and it's the home of the National Outdoor Education Conference, which we'll talk about soon. But I can guarantee those Queenslanders the snow will be gone by the time you come here, so don't panic. Okay. All right, before we get started, I'd like to voluntarily acknowledge the lands in which we all meet today and pay my respects to our traditional owners past and present, and hope that we can continue the conversation around their involvement in what we do every day, and we can learn a lot from them. So yeah, really looking forward to progressing more discussions with our First Nations subcommittee, which is being formed at the moment. So a bit of a toss around this this week. What I'm going to do, we've got a courtesy of the Outdoor Council of Australia, the beautiful Lucinda with us from Bartier, and Lucinda has been amazing in helping the Outdoor Council understand some of that challenging area of the outdoors when it comes to legal obligations. So we've asked Lucinda to come along, and we can share this with all of the country for the outdoors industry. So I'm going to hand over to Lucinda as I get up the documents, which are on the Outdoor Council website, and show them as we go through it. But I'll hand over to you, Lucinda, while I get that up.
Morning, everyone. So just to give a bit of an introduction about the work we actually did, we prepared two documents in relation to what the legal obligations are, or the key legal obligations for the outdoor recreational industry or providers who provide those activities. Just in terms of breaking down what we prepared, the first document we started preparing was sort of just to break down what those key legal obligations are. So the first one was obviously negligence in terms of liability under civil liability. The next thing was we looked at work health and safety obligations. And then the third thing was liability under the Australian consumer law. And we broke down those obligations in terms of who those obligations apply to, what those obligations are, and what the key consequences are if you fail to breach those obligations. When we did that, we then thought maybe this is getting a little detailed, and for a lot of people, I can understand why it can be a bit dry to go through that. So then we prepared a second document to complement that first document, which is what you're seeing here on your screen, which is prepare, inform, and ensure. So these are the key messages that we wanted to get across to people, being to prepare, knowing what your obligations are, to inform, so that is really just about informing participants about what the potential risks are, and then to ensure, so that's just making sure that you have insurance for when there are accidents that can happen. So that's just the basic background, but I guess what we've tried to do is create a tool just to help guide people, because I understand that providers on this call are from different states and territories in Australia, and the laws are different. So we can't provide a complete outline of what your legal obligations are, but we can at least guide people in the right way. And Laurie, if you don't mind scrolling down in that document to that table.
Mm-hmm.
Is that? Oh, you know the table I'm talking about? Which sort of specifies sections. I'm not sure if that's in there.
That thought, yes.
Okay, maybe that needs to be included, but basically what that table was just helping people guide them to the right sections in the legislation that applies to them in terms of civil liability, which is really the key thing that I think providers need to be aware of. So yeah, that's just the basic introduction. I'm not sure if people have any questions or have had a read through of those piece.
Some of you have sent a couple of questions in preparation for this morning. So Lucinda has got those with her. If you haven't submitted any generic questions, feel free to jump off mute and ask Lucinda at this point. And I'm just trying to find that table. Sorry, Lucinda.
No, that's okay. All right. So the first question was, how do we balance our work health and safety responsibilities with the protections offered by the acknowledgement by guests of obvious risks? So what I would say in terms of that question is, I think they go hand in hand. Part of, you know, your responsibilities in terms of getting participants to inform them of the obvious risks in participating in the activities is doing that risk management that is required under work health and safety laws, where you have to see what are the key risks and minimize those risks. So in terms of getting people to acknowledge those risks, it's first doing that risk assessment and then making sure that people who are participating are aware of those risks. That's what I would say in terms of that question.
Mark, did you have any questions on that one?
Sorry, just had to dash across the room to do it because I'm watching you on my TV.
No worries.
Very, very relaxed. And thanks for that. I suppose one of the things is in asking that question, I was referencing the risk warning that that has with our waiver, and this is where we picked it up when we were kind of looking at this a good couple of years ago, that our waiver states that recreational activities and dangerous recreational activities, including road cycling, involve a significant risk of physical harm, including personal injury, permanent disability, and even death. Such harm may result from your own actions or the actions and omissions of others. And I then find myself, I understand you go and do the risk assessment, but with work health and safety, it's quite explicit. It says that you must mitigate the significant risk of physical harm, permanent disability, and even death. So if you know that there's an obvious risk there that is going to cause death, but they tell you that you must mitigate it, but in going out on the road, you are mixing with traffic and you have no control over the other traffic. But so we take a approach of there's a philosophy in cycling: be safe, be seen, and that's how we've tried to take it. But you can't do what work health and safety is saying, is eliminate that risk. And so there is an imbalance there that I find.
Work health and safety, so it's a two-pronged test. It's that you need to eliminate that risk, and if you can't eliminate that risk, to minimize that risk as reasonably practicable. So I think that it does take into consideration that there are certain risks that cannot be eliminated, but it's in terms of the provider to ask themselves, what steps can we take, considering what risks there are, how likely they are, the gravity of them, what steps can we take, and are they reasonably practicable? And if you can do all those things, I think that's what the work health and safety, or your work health and safety obligations are. So while you can't eliminate every risk, so long as you're doing that assessment, then you should be complying with your obligations.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yes. Yeah. Which takes me to my next question, which you've got there, which is, how do you what's acceptable ways to communicate with the risks? Because what we find in we've found, we started our business in 2017, and when we put together all of our documents, including waivers and doing our risk plan, our solicitor very clearly pointed out to us the importance of communicating to our guests that what's obvious to us is obvious to them. And I note that last year there was a couple of cases published where the court actually re-emphasised that, saying that you need to do that. But what we find is we get two responses. We try to do this at a face-to-face way at the beginning of a tour, and you see people shutting down and just going, not listening, and start carrying on a conversation with them. Now, if you do this conscientiously, and I'm a very black and white person in respect to doing things. If you want to make sure that people know everything, you tell them everything. And so you get people shutting down. Then you get the others, which have been quite interesting to us, and we still get this, is people get overwhelmed and complain that we're scaring them unnecessarily. And so we've decided we're going to try something different from now on, which is to provide this risk briefing as a written briefing as part of our pre-tour information pack. And I'm wondering whether, and then simply ask when we do our pre-tour check-in, where we're checking helmets and checking they have their mandatory equipment, that have they read this information? Do they understand it? Do they have any questions? Does that cover us off in our obligations to do that?
I mean, I think the important thing is that you've given people, reasonable notice. So long as it's not hidden in, like, I'm not sure what this pack looks like, or this briefing note looks like, but if it's obvious, it's reasonable for a person to identify that in that document, that's part of giving notice. And there's different ways to give notice. Like you said, it could be verbally, it could be in writing. I think the main thing is that people are given reasonable notice. So it's not like in small writing and it's like hidden away. So long as it's fairly obvious to people, I think that's the important thing, and that you're clearly explaining what those risks are. In terms of, when I was reading through your comments in terms of people being scared, I think that sort of just made me think in terms of civil liability. One of the defenses, if there is a injury, is that one of the defenses is voluntary assumption of risks. So the important thing is that when people are participating in these activities, it has to be voluntary, that they've actually assumed those risks, that they understand what the risks are, and that they have voluntarily participated in that activity, knowing what those risks are. If they don't know what those risks are, and I think you were saying some people have sort of just come along because they've been encouraged and maybe don't fully appreciate what the risks are, that it is actually important to explain what that is. I guess I sort of understand in terms of what you're saying that maybe it might be unnecessary. I think important thing is to sort of explain to people what the risks are, and also that likelihood, and giving people the opportunity to reach out if they do have any questions. But in terms of written notice, there's nothing against that. You can provide notice in writing. I think the important thing is just to make it obvious to people. So it's not just ticking a box, you can do that, but that's a risk that, maybe people haven't read it. So long as you're making it obvious to people, then that's the key thing.
Yep. Everything we do is obvious.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. Thanks very much.
Okay. Then I think the next question was about COVID-19, and I was sort of talking to Laurie about this before. Just in terms of this, I mean, this is really difficult because I think, the laws and the health directions have changed. They're different between states and territories. So in terms of that, I think it's a changing thing. And in terms of, you know, the risk assessment that was, you know, referred to in that question, that you've sort of considered, you know, whether we can go into I think restaurants or different places to get food, but it's not ventilated, and that, you know, it can be raining outside, so the ability to do that outside is limited. I think really, again, it comes down to that risk assessment, and in the context also considering what the directions are that are being provided by the government as well. So I can't say for sure, you know, because it's a circumstantial thing, whether, you know, that applies in every circumstance, it's going to change. But I think the key thing, again, is just doing that risk assessment like you have done, and just making sure that, you know, it's a changing thing. I mean, health directions change all the time. I know at our workplace, we constantly get emails about what we encourage to do, whether we should be going into the office or trying to be working remotely. So that's what I would really say in terms of that. And again, you know, like I was sort of referring to with that first question, that under work health and safety laws, the obligation is to, one, try to eliminate the risk. And if that's not possible, then to do what's reasonably practical to minimize that risk. So does that answer the question?
So what we did there, Lucinda, is we had this question evolved over 3 tours over the last 2.5 months, and we had one tour where we went from a 10-day tour through central Queensland to Carnarvon Gorge, and most of the places we were eating there were outside eating, and the climate allowed us to do that. And then we did another tour between Cairns and Corumba, and we started to notice the venues packing people in more and more, and our guests and ourselves becoming a little uncomfortable with it. And we spoke to different venues and even tour operators who we used, who put people on buses, and they weren't enforcing the mask mandate that's required in Queensland for public buses. And they were saying, oh, well, we didn't want the conflict with people forcing them to do this, so we're not going along and enforcing that masks be worn. And then we had the major outbreak come, which is just settling down now, and we started looking at our third tour that we were doing, and we worked out we could do everything outside, and we got very good feedback from our guests for doing that. They were quite appreciative of it. So then when we looked at this tour that I referenced to you, which is Sydney to Melbourne, which would be leaving in a week's time, we realised that the climate down here in Victoria and New South Wales doesn't facilitate us to sit outside and eat outside. So we were looking at the AHPPC guidelines, which are saying ventilation's the key. And it's on that basis that we're looking at that ventilation that we decided, well, we have no control over this. We're telling people to isolate and stay away from other groups. We test them. So we went, well, it kind of would be contradictory to be testing people, asking them to stay away from other groups when we're doing tours, and then force them into an unventilated, crowded place to eat. So that's why we did that. But we were wondering whether we were overreacting, because we did have one come back to that. So
it's a really interesting question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just in terms of contradictions, I mean, I think we've all seen things where it's sort of contradictory, like when you go into a restaurant, they tell you to sort of like space, or maybe towards the beginning of the pandemic, to space out when you're waiting to get in. And then when you get in, you take off the mask. And it's just, it's a really hard thing to navigate. And I really empathize with people who have to sort of make, consider it in terms of how they run their business. Look, in terms of, your assessment of it and ventilation, I mean, I think it comes down, it's not a personal question, maybe more of a business question, a commercial question. I know one person wasn't happy about it, but it seemed like a lot of people were happy that that was being considered. In terms of what your legal obligations are, I mean, again, it's a difficult one because it's a very circumstantial thing that's ever changing. So I mean, I couldn't give you a concrete answer on what's what you should and should not be doing. That what you should at least be doing is that risk assessment. And then it comes after that is in terms of that commercial question, what you want to be, how you want to run your business. I mean, I know vaccine requirements, you know, the government had that to attend offices or to go to work, and then that's been dropped. But there's some businesses who have continued with those requirements, and that's a commercial question. So it really comes down to how you would like to, or how the organization would like to run their business. As well, it is a two-part thing, but it's a really difficult thing to navigate because it is changing and there are contradictions, and you can only do what you can do. So long as you're doing that risk assessment, I think that's all I can really say in terms of what you are required to be doing.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah,
I suppose it's also
Mm.
So one thing that I'm also aware of is that we have our public liability insurance, but if there was an event, an incident, and the person who complained, probably, Laurie and I have talked about customer X in the past, and the person who complained may be a customer X, and even though they complained that they couldn't go, if we did go, they could have been the one who's complained because they caught the thing. And the issue is that if there is an incident and workplace starts to look at it, my understanding is the insurer will sit there and sit back and go, well, we're not doing anything until we've found out, you know, what the outcome of this prosecution is likely to be. Because, you know, you could be seen to be, your public liability insurance falls over if you're shown to be negligent. So that's another catch that we kind of trying to navigate through. And I suppose COVID is the thing that's highlighted all of this to us as risk managers.
Yeah. In terms of insurance, I couldn't, I'm not an expert in that, so I couldn't tell you sort of what the standard procedures are and how they sort of analyze that. But I think at the end of the day, this is a good example of where insurance is good to have, because there are things that are beyond your control. In terms of what your cover is, it's another thing. What is the cover that you have? And I think we've sort of addressed that in that insurance part to make sure that it covers the key contingencies. But yeah, in terms of how insurers react to that, I'm not an expert in that. I'm not sure if you have a particular question I can take down in regards to that, and I can probably ask someone, a colleague who actually helped prepare these documents, who actually works in our insurance team.
All right. Well, I suppose the question is, I do vaguely, it's not the sort of information I keep it in my head, is the wording of my insurance policy. But
why not, Mark?
Because I keep a lot more useless information that confuses me already. But I think the thing is that if you're found to be negligent, the insurance, public liability insurance may not be applicable. And my feeling and my concern has always been that if workplace health and safety found that you were negligent around this obligation, with perhaps COVID and taking someone into a not well ventilated place with no spacing, and you know, it came down to what we're talking right at the very beginning, is that they didn't have a choice to do that either if they wanted to eat. You could find yourself in a great deal of poo. So that's really the question. But it probably will depend on the wording of the policy as well. The other thing that that question is given that COVID's part of the pandemic, does this apply anyway? Does public liability cover you off in this area as well? So do we need to be extra cautious in that area? And I suspect that anything to do with COVID is included in the pandemic exclusions of any insurance policy. So that would be my question.
Okay. Well, I'll ask my colleague, and maybe I can send our answer to Laurie, and she can forward it to you, Mark. Is that okay?
I'll forward it to I'm sure it's applicable to everybody, not just me.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Lucinda. Thanks very much.
That's okay. I'm not sure if there's any other questions or about the document or?
So Lucinda, maybe going back to the table, sorry, do you want to just highlight what you're saying about the table again?
Yeah, so this is just a bit of a tool just to sort of guide people in terms of what the key parts of the legislation for civil liability are. So we put it into three different sections, being obvious risk. So that's one. Defense. If there's an obvious risk, there's certain parts of these legislation actually cover off on, you know, whether you have a duty to warn of obvious risks. Just in terms of the ACT and Northern Territory, we did sort of just put in there, while it's not applicable, there is coverage under common law. So it's not like you don't have any defences. It just means that the legislation hasn't actually specified that. Mm-hmm. Also have the dangerous recreational activity sections, which is another defence that specifically talks about when an obvious risk materialises during a dangerous recreational activity. Mm-hmm. And as you can see, not all states and territories actually include that section. It's only New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania, and Western Australia. And then another thing that we were sort of talking about when we were formalising or preparing these documents was in terms of how volunteers are covered off. So every state and territory actually does have sections in regards to that, and sort of what coverage there is or protection there is for volunteers, what a volunteer is, and also what the exceptions are. So I think one is, while there are protections, there are sort of some exclusions to that. So we've just highlighted what those key sections are so that, you know, providers can sort of familiarize themselves with what that key legislation is and take that into consideration to how that affects them. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's
and sorry, do you want to just jump to sorry, I just need to get to the second one, because I think this is the second document that OCA got you to do. It's got a lot more. Sorry, I'm just steering the ship. Is around the key legal obligations, which is what people really need to understand.
Yeah, so I think in terms of just understanding what each of those obligations are, we've just tried to spell it out and break it down as best we can. We've put some footnotes just to sort of provide further information as well. I mean, it can get quite dense, and we've tried to limit to what the key things are, and just sort of make people aware of, you know, the importance of these obligations with, you know, what the potential consequences are, and also make people aware of whether it affects them, because with each of these obligations, you know, certain people are affected. When it comes to common law negligence, anyone could be affected by that. When we're talking about a PCBU, you know, it is quite a broad concept. Maybe you'd be surprised by who would come within that definition. And then also just trying to be specific in terms of what those obligations really constitute. And I think in terms of what we were discussing about work health and safety, I think we've sort of tried to put in what, you know, about minimizing risk in the first instance, and then eliminating risks in the first instance, and if that's not possible, then minimizing those risks to what's reasonably practicable.
And
yeah,
so the main thing that, you know, and Dom, please speak to this if you wish, you know, the OCA were really keen to understand where the AAAS and the good practice guides sort of fit in some of the tools that, you know, would help the industry. Did you want to talk to that, Lucinda, and what you recommend in here?
Yeah, so I think the key things, the key legal obligations, because from my understanding, the standards and the guidelines, they're trying to get people to think about, you know, how to identify the risk, what steps they need to be taking in preparing to provide these activities. So I think the key things would be civil liability. So that first obligation, because the obligation is just to make sure that people, are not hurting themselves. So the duty, as you can see, is where it's reasonably foreseeable that your actions or inactions may affect another person. That's what the duty is. So just to make sure that, we're doing what's reasonably foreseeable to not so nobody's injured while participating in those activities, which means thinking about what the risks are, and again, informing people what the risks are as well. And then the second thing as well would be work health and safety, because again, there's another risk assessment that's part of that. And the interesting thing with work health and safety is that it's not just if an accident happens that you're liable. It's just the fact that there's a risk there that hasn't been, eliminated or minimized. And by not doing that and at least minimizing the risk, you could be in breach of that obligation. So while there is some overlap between these obligations, they are different there are slight differences. So,
and I think, where business listens is when you start talking about the potential fines. And
yes.
when it comes to that, it certainly makes you sit up. Sorry, Dom, go for it.
Oh, thanks, Laura. I was just going to say that's sort of the similar point, Lucinda, on where the adventure activity standards and good practice guides come in, where they're all about responsible delivery of outdoor activities where there are dependent participants involved. And that piece of, understanding what all the different elements of the system that you're operating in, and ensuring you're considering all the different aspects and delivering the activity in a responsible manner in relation to the health and safety of workers and participants, but also the other aspects of it, including the environmental aspects, the cultural heritage aspects, and every other part of it. But that's where this overlaps, I think, strongly into making sure that we're doing the activities in the right manner and that people are getting a great experience as a result, and we're also protecting ourselves and our clients.
Absolutely. Well said, Dom. Any questions from anyone while we have such knowledge here this morning on this matter? I've just put the link in the chat for where OCA has the documents, and I'll make sure we add that table as well into that. But any concerns? Any confirmations from their own methodology in risk management? Oh, you've blown them all away, Lucinda.
No, Mark's back.
Oh, Mark's back. Okay, good, Mark.
Mark's crawled across the floor.
I can count on you.
It's just that we're redoing our risk and looking at a risk management plan and working our way through our risk register at the moment. So this is really top of mind. Your table there, Lucinda, there's a number of states in there that you've got not applicable to, and that was to do with the obvious risk protection, one of those being the ACT, which is where I'm based. We also run tours in other states as well, being South Australia, Victoria, Queensland. If I'm hearing what you said just immediately before this question, is that as long as we go through and do these risk analysis and communicate the risks to people, it doesn't matter whether our state has an obvious risk protection or a definition for dangerous recreational activity within the Civil Liabilities Act. That that's the key point. Communicate those risks. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And what I'd say is, in terms of the history of the Civil Liability Act, so it was negligence, and the duty of care was it's a common law. It exists in common law, and every state and territory has put in place civil liability legislation to sort of talk about, or sort of put in those common law doctrines and those defenses like obvious risk or voluntary assumption of risk, or where something's inherent in the activity and I know what that risk is and I've done it anyway. But in terms of every state and territory, I would say that because every state has legislation, there are slight differences, but it's all come from the same thing. It's all come from common law. So those defenses originally existed in common law. They've just been codified, if you will, in legislation. So I wouldn't say, when it says not applicable, I think the key thing I wanted to say there is that it's not that you don't not have a defense in relation to obvious risks. It's just, it hasn't been for whatever reason put in that territory or state's legislation. So that's what I would say. But again, it comes back to those key things, which is, like you said, about doing risk management and trying to inform people that those are the risks when they're participating in those activities.
Right. Okay. And Laurie, in respect to the fines that you were talking about, I know New Zealand's a different jurisdiction, but it's interesting that earlier this year a tour company pleaded guilty to not having done the proper risk assessments for White Island. They weren't on White Island when it erupted, but they were fined, I think it's something like 500,000 New Zealand dollars for not having done the assessment. And yeah, it's just like you're saying, that you can just get fined for not having done this. You're not going to get fined. You don't have to wait for an incident to happen. They can knock on your door and say, where is this? Where's your risk assessment for this?
Very true.
And I'm sure it's going to happen sooner or later to us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks again.
No, thanks, Mark. And needless to say, I think we've openly discussed it at board level, but also just in amongst colleagues, how we're feeling right now. We're probably at our most vulnerable when it comes to exactly these fines, these checks, because we are understaffed. We are not probably doing the checks and measures that we would have hoped to have been doing. So the lesson here, if I can be blunt, is risk comes first. Your risk reviews come first, and it's timely reminder for everyone to get a bit more focused and look, if it means turning down work for the sake of your processes, it's going to mean at the end of the day probably a better outcome for the business.
But I think one thing I would just sort of say in terms of those, like what we tried to do as well, is try to sort of show that by being aware of your legal obligations, that you may not have to turn away business, but that you can actually alter how you do things, and you understand what your defenses are. So by taking the steps to provide notice, that how to sort of, you don't have to turn away business because there's a risk, but you know how to handle those risks.
Yes.
So.
Yes, absolutely. No, well said. Thank you. Any final calls for questions, or we'll move on to what's been going on in the rest of the world other than our legal side? Well, I don't want to speak for Dom, but I certainly, on behalf of the OCA, thank Lucinda and her team very much for helping the OCA with compiling this. And as I put the link in there, I will get the table in there as well, so you've got that there. But thank you so much for your assistance with this. It's an important step for the whole industry.
That's okay. And it's been a pleasure working with Outdoors and just formulating that. I mean, it's been good for me as well to sort of, about it from that perspective. And yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. So yeah.
Awesome. Great. And if you want to stick around, you're more than welcome. But I know, as I said, it's probably hearing my voice anymore is enough. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, guys.
Okay, take care.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. All right, back to the round the table discussion. So let's see what's going on. We have a new policy as of Outdoors New South Wales and ACT have instigated a climate change policy adopted by the board last week. So very excited about this one, obviously embracing all things around advocacy, action, and working collaboratively with our stakeholders to create change. So we've certainly committed to our options there, and really keen to get that out to the members. We also do have a template for members to use as well. So as part of this, we'll be having available a template that members can look at and adopt that might be in a similar frame to what we have done. But there's lots of tools out there, and I'm not going to kill you by word on PowerPoint, but there is so many things that become tools when you can look at your mitigation and adaptation with climate change. The committee are putting a whole heap of content up on the committee page so that you can certainly go in and have a look at what could be optional for you to look at. But as you can see here, there's a hell of a lot of different things that people can look at doing immediately and into short-term, medium-term and long-term effects. But the time is now, guys. We've got to really start making headway in this space. We are still considered as, what was the word they used? Australia is insufficient action, I think was the word on the climate change monitor. So we've got to do better, and the only way to do that is to do it all together. Okay, quick round the table on grants. So the ones that are still open are the Tourism Activation Fund. So that's funding tourism infrastructure and opportunities that you're looking at. The young and children people, that one's open till December, but as we said last week, that might be exhausted soon. So if you are considering doing the Children and Young People Wellbeing Initiative, please jump in soon. The Stronger Country Communities is open until the 23rd of September. That's great if you're looking at collaborations in your local community and getting some activities or projects, infrastructure, programs up into looking at stronger communities basically, but there's a whole heap of criteria on the website that you can look at. The Music and Overnight Camps grant is still open. If you haven't applied for this, I will call you. It's open till the first week in September. You have your 30,000 sitting there, so please, if you haven't applied, do so. Safe Work rebate, we have the $1,000 from Safe Work Australia for any activities that you're doing to keep your workplace safe. And of course, the ACT Event Fund, that is open till the 5th of September. So quite a few of these are closing next, geez, that is next week. September's next week, everyone. Yes, some of them will be closing next week. So jump in there and some later September. All right, some of the need to knows. We've got some great applicants for our Alpine Guides subcommittee. So really excited about this one. We're going to be challenging some thinking around what we're going to need in the snow and backcountry when it comes to accreditation, certification, training, and some of the other things that might pop up in this space. But if you are interested in putting your expression of interest in to be volunteer on that subcommittee, I urge you to do that before next Friday. We also have the First Nations subcommittee still open as well. So I think we've got 2 positions available on the First Nations subcommittee at this point in time. A reminder of what we mentioned last week from the Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award holders that might be aged between 18 and 32. We would love to see Australia represented in the emerging leader representations on the International Council. So if you are interested, or if you know someone that might be interested, that is aged between 18 and 32, you need to apply by next Wednesday. So jump onto the Duke of Edinburgh website and the details are there. Officer Children's Guardian training, it's still available and being added to by the 2nd. I just want to publicly acknowledge the wonderful work of Mark Laurenti, who is certainly amazing when it comes to support for our sector. He actually came to our mentoring session this week and did a fabulous overview of all of the safe work guidelines. And he is our go-to for anything. If you want some solid advice specific to your business, he is offering that. So I urge you, if you haven't got his details, get in touch with me and I will certainly put you in touch. He is going out and doing 2-hour sessions with businesses and taking people through the safe work guidelines and some areas that they can look at in their practices. So again, great service, great resource. Coming soon, I mentioned this last week. I'm pretty excited about this. This is your new membership platform. It will be the go-to for everything that you will need as a member of Outdoors New South Wales and ACT. You'll have access to tools and resources, all the research that you can grab through us, promotional tools, everything that you will need, including the links to all of the connect and shares going forward. So yeah, as I say, I'm a bit excited, but it's coming together. A few little things to do before we get it up, but it won't be far away. And just on reminders for members, don't forget to add your product into the website. You should already be a member of our Outdoors New South Wales ACT.org website. If you are not, please let us know. Once you enter your login details, you'll have an option to then select add article or add event. Now you have endless opportunities to add articles and events as a member, so I urge you to jump in there and make sure you put your content onto the website so everyone can see it, and we can get some promotion for you, your business or your events. And a reminder just on COVID, I know we've just been speaking about COVID with Lucinda, but it's still out there and we still want to lessen the amount of sick leave that's happening in the community. We want to show that we are leading in this space. So if you want your own signature for your email or something for your website, you do have that banner available for all the members, and please make sure you use it and also practice it. Events coming up. AGM is next Wednesday. So here we go, another year done and dusted. It will be our inaugural annual general meeting for the company limited. So Outdoors New South Wales ACT is now a company limited by guarantee, and we'll love sharing all of the things that happened last year with you next week. We also have Karen Jones, who's the CEO of Office of Sport, coming and speaking with us as our guest speaker for the session. So if you have an RSVP, please do so, so we know that we can factor you into the numbers. And of course, the beautiful scene behind me is the location for our conference coming up, and that is the National Outdoor Education Conference. We are really running close on accommodation, guys. So if you haven't booked your accommodation, I urge you to email events@outdoorsnswact.com.au. We had to take it off the website because the availability is so low. We couldn't guarantee it if you booked it through the website. So if you haven't booked accommodation, please get into us as soon as possible on your requirements. But numbers are looking fabulous. We are so excited. We are now 1 month today until we are there. So looking forward to seeing everyone and getting this thing finally done. All right, at that conference, we will have a climate change adaptation workshop. We're inviting all of the retailers that will be down in the exhibition space to come and just chat to us about what they're doing in trying to look at adaptation. Now, this is not, around their packaging and how much they're reducing for climate change. We hope that that's happening, but when it comes to adaptation, we're trying to understand how we're coping with the climate change issues in what we're being provided in our equipment and our apparel. So if you have any wonderful ideas or any challenges that you are continually faced with, please bring them to this session. It will be the Wednesday morning. We will have breakfast for you there, and we can chat over a croissant and a coffee. So we'll look forward to having great ideas that we can throw the guys from One Planet, Paddy Palin, and everyone else who's attending Wilderness Equipment and Equipped Outdoors. Our masterclass will be right around the corner after that. So if you are a member, you do get a free ticket. If you want a second person, it's just a minimal fee. We want to make sure as many members get access to this masterclass as possible. We have an amazing agenda on our plate. This is very different to the conference. This is a solid masterclass, which means intense workshops to take your business into the scenarios of what we talk about. So you walk away with practical applications that you can adapt straight away into your business. So I urge you to jump in and register for that, and we'll get that cracking on the 24th and 25th of November. And that is everything that's happening around the outdoors. Now we've got 8 minutes left, so I'm going to stop sharing there. I'm going to stop the recording.